There is a version of your faith life that looks very healthy from the outside. You show up, you read, you pray, you serve when it is your turn, and you say no to the things you know you are supposed to say no to. By almost any visible measure, you are doing it right. And yet, somewhere underneath all of that, there is a question that will not go away. Is it enough? Are you enough? You lie awake some nights not because you stopped believing, but because you are not sure if you have believed correctly, prayed enough, served enough, or changed enough to be confident in where you stand. You are faithful, and you are exhausted, and you cannot quite explain why the two things keep arriving together. What if the exhaustion is not a sign that you need to try harder? What if it is a sign that what you have been trying to do cannot actually be done? Paul wrote to the churches in Galatia, and the question he asked them is worth sitting with. Having begun by the Spirit, are you now being perfected by the flesh? He was not asking because they had abandoned the faith. They were still showing up, still observing all the right things. The problem was not their effort. The problem was what the effort was trying to accomplish. They had started by receiving grace, and somewhere along the way they had quietly decided that receiving grace was only the beginning, and the rest was up to them. Their obedience had shifted from response to repair. They were no longer living out of what they had been given. They were living as though they still had to secure it. This is the version of Christianity that looks like dedication from a distance but feels like exhaustion from the inside. The person living this way does not stop caring about God. They care intensely. But their faith has quietly shifted its center of gravity. It is no longer anchored to what God declared. It is anchored to what they are still trying to prove. That shift is subtle. It does not feel like walking away from God. It feels like taking your faith seriously. But the weight it produces is not the weight of faithfulness. It is the weight of an arrangement that was never the arrangement God offered. Romans 8 begins with one of the most important sentences in the entire New Testament. There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Not for those who have reached a certain level of spiritual discipline. Not for those who have finally resolved their recurring struggle. Now, for those who are in Christ. The word now is doing something important. It is removing the condemnation from the end of a process and placing it at the start. The freedom Paul describes is not the reward waiting at the finish line. It is the ground you are already standing on. If you have been living as though the condemnation is still pending, as though the verdict has not yet come in and your behavior this week might determine it, you are not living in the reality that Romans 8 describes. You are living in a courtroom that was emptied at the cross. This is not permission to live carelessly. Paul has already addressed that objection earlier in Romans. The point of Romans 8 is not that sin and obedience no longer matter. The point is that your standing before God is not maintained by your performance. You are not accepted on a trial basis, where God is watching to see if this week confirms what last week suggested. The acceptance is settled. The standing is secure. What flows from that security is not passivity. It is something more powerful, a person who no longer obeys out of fear, but out of gratitude for something already given. Ephesians 2 makes this even clearer. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. The logic here matters. Salvation is not the part God does, and then obedience is the part you do to stay qualified. The entire thing is grace. But then the passage continues, and this is the part that changes how obedience feels. For we are what He has made us, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand, that we should walk in them. The good works are still there. The obedience is still expected. But notice where they appear in the sentence. They come after being made, not before. They come after being created in Christ Jesus, not as the condition for it. You do not walk in the good works to prove you belong. You walk in them because you already do. There is a difference between a child doing chores to avoid being sent away and a child doing chores because they know they are loved, and this is simply what the family does. The chores are the same. The relationship underneath them is completely different. Jesus described something similar when he said, "Come to me all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. The invitation is not to stop working. A yoke is a working tool. The invitation is to stop pulling alone. And more than that, to stop pulling in the direction of something you are trying to earn. When you are trying to prove yourself to God, every act of obedience becomes a transaction. Every prayer is a deposit. Every missed quiet time is a withdrawal. That is an exhausting way to live, and it is not the relationship Jesus was describing. In John 15, he used a different picture. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it remains in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. A branch does not strain to grow fruit in order to prove it belongs to the vine. It belongs to the vine, and because it belongs, the fruit comes. When you are trying to prove yourself to God through performance, you are living like a branch that has already decided it might be cut off, and every grape it produces is one more argument for why it should stay. That is not abiding. That is negotiating. And no branch was ever designed to negotiate its way into belonging. This is not a call to stop obeying. The branch still grows. The good works still matter. Obedience is not optional in the life of a believer. But obedience that flows from the settled knowledge of grace is not the same thing as obedience that flows from the fear of losing ground. One is a branch growing because it is connected. The other is a branch squeezing because it is afraid. They can look the same for a while. They do not feel the same. And over years, obedience built on fear eventually breaks under the weight of never feeling like enough. If you recognize yourself in this, the next movement is not complicated, even if it is not easy. It begins with honesty. Something like this. Lord, I have been living as though your acceptance is still being decided. I have been treating obedience like evidence I am presenting, instead of a response I am giving. Forgive me for turning your grace into a courtroom. Help me to live from what you have already declared, not towards something I am still trying to earn. That is not a complicated prayer, but it is an honest one, and an honest prayer offered from the right place is often more powerful than an eloquent one offered from exhaustion. That is not a prayer you will only need once, but it is the right direction, and the direction matters more than the pace. There is therefore now no condemnation. Not after your next victory, not once your prayer life improves, now. You are not on probation with God. You are not in a waiting period while the final score is tallied. If you are in Christ, the verdict is in. The question is not whether God has accepted you, the question is whether you are willing to live like He has.